Hello, everyone. My name is Chris May. I am the Open Source Solutions Advocate at Sangoma, joined by Elvita Crespo in Open Source Marketing at Sangoma. I'm happy to welcome everyone back today, Tuesday, January 28th, 2025, for our second session of the AstriCon 2025 virtual track. Our first session was a fun, motivational introduction from a new perspective on the project. You can catch the replay on YouTube in the coming days for this and all the sessions, the tracks. Now for a turn to the old, or at least some history that may be new to you. Jens is a staff software engineer at Munich-based startup HR startup Personio. Before this, he spent 12 years at Google, working in Munich and Mountain View. Fluent in English, German, French, and Dutch, he is also learning Spanish. Beyond his professional career, Jens has a passion for technology history. He has even created a private museum of historic telephony and switching equipment, reflecting his curiosity and expertise beyond software engineering. Jens, I'll turn off my camera and hand it off to you.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Hello. As Chris said, I'm Jens, telephone collector and curator of my own small telephone museum. So, as a kid, I loved to take things apart, especially devices and electric things. My Belgian grandmother knew about this, and once she gave me this telephone when she upgraded hers to a new one. I must have been 5 or 6 years old then, and from then on, telephones became a topic of fascination for me. You might ask, why? Well, besides this nostalgic feeling, my family was quite international, so phone calls were often the only means of communication to close ones in the 1980s and 90s. The ability for a child to speak to someone in different continents was not taken as granted as it is today. The different call progress and signaling tones from different countries already piqued my interest. Some other reasons why old telephones fascinate me include that their inner workings are relatively simple to understand, that the early devices especially show craftsmanship and quality. They were built to last out of different nice materials with a nice touch and feel to it. They remain functional or can be brought back to life and working condition within the modern network. And the telephone and switching equipment was a foundation for electronic data exchange in the first large-scale network to be hacked. On that last point, do you know who these two gentlemen are? Before founding Apple Computers, Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs built and sold so-called blue boxes. These devices allowed to emit sounds, and taking advantage of system vulnerabilities in the US long-distance telephone exchange network in the 1960s and 70s, to make calls as well as join like-minded phone freaks for conference calls across the nation free of charge. Of course, this was quickly deemed illegal, but the telephone network was the most complex machinery available to tinker with for the interested youngsters out there at the time, and it served as a foundation for the computer industry. Now back to myself. So already during my youth, I've started to assemble a collection of historic telephones, and going forward, then I've been restoring them and assembling them into a private museum at my home, making them functional again, interconnected with each other and the public telephone network through both original and modern switching equipment. I've tried to focus on German, American, and Belgian phones older than 1970, and obviously the older, the better. Here's a quick overview of the architecture of the collection. There's a lot to see here, and we'll get back to this as we go through the presentation. But typically adapters, phones, exchanges, automatic and manual ones, few trunk lines connecting across. But let's start chronologically with the oldest telephone generation. These are the parts that are circled here in the schematics. I won't go into details on the history of the invention of the telephone. You can read up on it yourself if you're interested. But very shortly said, as many inventions, it needed several stepping stones to build something that would work and be a commercial success. Charles Bourseul had the theoretical idea. Antonio Meucci and Johann Philipp Reis independently built somewhat working devices to transmit sound. Reis' device is shown here, On the left, there's a transmitter made to resemble an ear with eardrum, and the receiver on the right with a wooden box that amplified the vibrations by a knitting needle in this box. Shortly said, though, the world was not yet ready for their inventions. Then you can read up on the patent wars surrounding Graham Bell, Elisha Gray, who both filed a very similar patent just hours apart on February 14, 1876. They both were familiar with Rye's work from a decade earlier, and this was followed by microphone improvements made by Edison and Berliner. Key to clear voice transmission was to not only interrupt the electronic circuit based on the sound, but actually change the resistance of the circuit modulated by the sound waves. Those improvements also were subject to many further legal battles between the Bell Telephone Company, which would later become AT&T, and Western Union Telegraph Company, the big player who owned the telegraph lines that were used prior to telephony. Eventually, these were all decided in Bell's favor. Bell's early telephone is visible here as well, the transmitter and the receiver being the same piece to alternatively hold against the ear and the mouth. These early telephones were called local battery phones. So that means the electricity to operate the microphone came from a battery located locally installed. As seen at the bottom left of the screen, typically these were liquid Leclanché cells in glass bottles, providing about 3 volts DC. You see how the telephone on the left consists of multiple parts connected by wires. Going up from the battery at the very bottom, the next box houses the heavy magnetocrank, which was used to generate the ringing AC voltage that would ring the other end or the switchboard. Further up, a small desk for notes, followed by the box connecting to the handset. Most often, the microphone and speaker were 2 separate parts, as seen on the right, with the microphone being stationary because any movement would result in heavy noise to be heard due to the carbon particles moving in the microphone. A transformer used as anti-side tone circuit lowers the subscriber's own voice in the speaker, which they otherwise would hear much louder than the other party's voice. Finally, at the very top, the bell for ringing the phone, which is connected to the circuit whenever the switch hook is on hook. Those individual parts in these individual boxes grew closer together into one device, as can be seen by these examples of a German 1908 local battery wall phone on the left and an American Western Electric one on the right. Now, how do you connect these together? 2 of them can be directly connected with the 2 wires and can call and talk to each other, but to connect to different phones, switching is needed, which was at the time manual. Here's a quick view of 2 German desk phones for local battery. And as you see, they already have a combined handset where microphone and speaker is in one thing that you hold to your face. Another closer view inside here. And then here is a small local battery switchboard to connect 4 local battery phones with each other or with one of the 2 central battery phone lines, so the later period normal analog phone lines. The ringing current, so if you turn the crank on one of the phones, you see these small flaps that fall out, and the operator can then answer and ask whom to connect with. And the connection can then be established either by pressing buttons or plugging in cords. Similarly, military style or disaster recovery switchboard existed up until in the 1980s. This technology is very simple. You just need wires and someone to pull them together. So as a summary, I can use a 120-year-old telephone in my house, switched through a manual exchange, an analog telephone adapter, Asterisks, a telephony provider, the public telephone network, to talk to my brother's cell phone in New Zealand, for example. Now, local battery phones became expensive to maintain due to the need to replace batteries regularly. Using a central battery at the switchboard or in the central office was the next step of the evolution. This also meant the heavy magneto would no longer be needed in the individual's houses or phones. Instead, lifting the receiver closed the loop in the central office, which could be detected and was shown by a lamp lighting up, and often a buzzer sound alerting the operator that there's something to do. The central office could issue AC ringing current, and the phones used a bell in series with a capacitor to let them ring. Together with the evolution from local to common battery, a further evolution to self-dial service took place. Almon Strauger, an undertaker from Indiana, supposedly suspected preferential treatment of his competitors by the local telephone operators when people called undertakers in case of death. He didn't get as much business as he expected. To make sure that callers would decide themselves who to call, he invented the first automatic telephone exchange in 1889. After some more evolutions, the step-by-step switches were deployed in central offices, which would be actuated by short interruptions of the electrical loop by dial pulses in a phone's rotary dial. The contacts in the switch would first move upwards by the numbers of digits dialed and next rotate. Such switches were cascaded so that, for example, with numbers of length 3, 1,000 subscribers could be reached. This system spread through the 1910s to 1930s, first for local calls and later long-distance calling. Here's an early German self-dial phone model from 1911 from my collection. Another early wall telephone. This one was actually retrofitted to get a dial installed in it, as it used to be a local battery telephone before. So you see how the materials were actually being used in an economical fashion, and it was often the case that telephones were being changed and repaired and kind of went through an evolution during their lifetime. This is another Bavarian telephone nicknamed the Cowfoot. The entire circuitry and the bell fit into this pretty small footprint. Some more images, a British candlestick self-dial on the left and a US Western Electric 202 on the right. Aren't they beautifully designed? Keeping the pulse frequency and ratio within tolerance of the electromagnetical equipment was important and is most often achieved through a centrifugal governor. The centrifugal and friction forces are kept in balance in the dial, resulting into the exact desired speed. Step-by-step switches were further evolved, for example into these German EMD motor selectors, which only move in one direction instead of turning and moving up. To connect central battery pulse dial telephones. For most of them, I am using ATAs, so analog telephone adapters, that convert the speech and dial signals to SIP and RTP protocols, and those I connect to a mini PC with Asterisk via Ethernet. There are many ATA manufacturers, but for those historic telephones, we want ATAs that support pulse dialing, that have a strong ringing voltage, a low ringing frequency of 20 to 30 Hertz for a functional and nice sounding mechanical bell sound. And as an extra for the payphones that I have operational, we want support for metering tones. In Germany, these were 16 kHz pulses. Often ATAs provide only a few of these so-called FXS ports, but I have also two audio codes devices that have 24 ports each, which is pretty nice to connect many phones at once. Furthermore, I have a Cisco ATA that also has FXO ports. And with those, I can direct pulse dial into an electromechanical PBX from the outside or from any other part of the collection. And some telephones are connected to that one. This Telenorma PBX for one outside line and 10 internal subscribers was often used in offices, for example. The ringing and signaling machine can be seen on the top left, which mechanically generates the tones like the ringing cadence or the busy signal. The telephones connected to this exchange use the grounding key here at the bottom right of the desk set to request an outside line or for switching back to internal dial tone while on an external call so that you can pass it on to a different subscriber. So more telephones here with grounding keys, all designed for use behind PBXs. In Germany, the official authorities and post office had to approve each device that was connected to the public telephone network. But behind PBXs, manufacturers were allowed to build their own phone models that were not approved for the use in the public network. There's another one here where we have some touch buttons for the first time, although this one is still generating pulse dial internally. At the end, a call will typically reach Asterisk, especially if it goes out of my house. While this is the area of expertise of this audience, I myself am pretty shallow here, and it took a bit of effort to install and set up Asterisk. Previously, I was using analog PBXs only, but numbering was too inflexible here, and I'm very happy with the flexibility I now have. What was needed here for switching with Asterisk? I defined the SIP endpoints for the ATAs in the pjsip.conf, where Asterisk is acting as the SIP server, set ports and authentication, and configure it. I defined the outbound connectivity in the same file. Asterisk is here the SIP client connecting to different telephony providers. I'm defining the numbering plan in the extensions config, using a 3-digit plan for any of the internal phones. 1,000 phones should be enough, I hope. And defining the rules for which external provider to use, depending on the call destination. I also have programmed some advanced services like talking clock, quote of the day, and similar things so that I can actually demonstrate some things. Finally, the metering tones depending on the call destination, which I need for the payphones. One of them I make accessible to the neighborhood in a 1970s phone booth located outside of my house to make calls or to use these special services like listening to a quote of the day for free. The payphone inside of the booth is actually a rather modern 1990s model, because anything older than that wouldn't be configurable to accept euro coins. In contrast to the older payphones inside, who have mechanical coin chutes and therefore are hard-coded to certain types of coins, which might no longer be in circulation here in Europe. When acquiring the phone, my goal is to restore it in its original working state. Typically, these phones are incredibly dirty, and it helps to disassemble so that they can be cleaned, scrubbed, and polished. Obviously, depending on the material the phone is in, different techniques need to be used. Typically, the older they are in wood, then metal, bakelite, and eventually some other type of plastic. Sometimes the phones have also been badly modified by someone to make them work. For example, local battery phones that were attempted to be adjusted to work on central battery lines. I'm trying to bring them back to their original circuitry and shape. Finally, adjusting rotary dial speed, repairing cables, replacing electric components like capacitors are also tasks that are often needed. That's it already. Thanks a lot for listening. I definitely would have liked to be physically present at AstriCon to see what you are all up to, but my talk is, I guess, as commercial as could be, as non-commercial as could be, so I don't think anyone would be sponsoring my travel from Germany for this. I hope this virtual talk still was interesting, and there is time for questions if you have any.
Thanks a lot, Jens. It was fascinating. History lesson. Learned several new things there that I had not known. And great, pictures. Thanks for sharing, about your museum. I think my first question was to make sure that everyone ask everyone if they got a copy of the link there, which when we do put this up, you can freeze on that frame in the beginning. But this is something that is open on the internet, and but there's definitely a real life component here. So I guess contact Jens for how to go about that. So sort of my question is this your phone booth. I'll just start out with my first question here. Outside of your home, fascinating, and that is accessible just with no coin, or are you trying to make 50 cent on that every phone call?
So I'm indeed trying to not make a loss, at least. The, the free services that I provide are basically behind like self-invented 1-800 or like 0800 in Germany numbers that can be called for free. But if you want to actually call like people in the world or like local, like in Germany, there is a price to pay, which depends on your destination. It's basically just mostly covering the costs that would anyway be incurred, less than it was when such phone booths were actually still in operation. In Germany in 2021, the last public telephone has been switched off, so there is actually no more around. So therefore, I think it's a bit of a nostalgic trip as well for some passers-by who kind of show their children how it used to be in the past.
It's lovely to keep that apart. Sorry to hear that the last booth was closed. I think there's still an opportunity for a retrofit. I've seen in these co-working facilities, for example, there seems to be a move back towards that bit of private space as a way to try to get folks back into the office, maybe after a few years of working remotely, and that pivot. Still, it was nice to have that private space, and I mean, where else would Superman change his outfit? There's just so much of our history there. So I do see a couple of questions that popped in. The first is from Rob. In your museum, how do you connect local battery phones to central office battery phones and allow them to call each other?
Yes, so you cannot directly connect them, but you basically need to go through a manual switchboard like this one. So here you basically have the interface between local and common battery, and you are then, for example, here in this device, you can make a connection between the two, right? So here you can actually dial out into the self-dial common battery network, or you can, with the crank that's barely visible on the bottom right, you can also basically call a local battery phone or get the calls or accept the calls, and you can connect them together. So you need a switchboard for that.
Great. Next question from Daniel. Can you describe in more detail how you got local battery phones to call out via an ATA?
So this is mostly the same question, only that basically on the local battery line that's connected to the switchboard, there would be, for example, the ATA providing this line. And then on the other side of the switchboard, there would be the local battery phone, right? So you can indeed not directly connect these two, or you shouldn't directly connect a local battery phone to a normal phone line, either provided by your phone provider, if they still do, or by an ATA, because these two things are not compatible, right? And particularly if you turn the crank, you will definitely break or destroy your ATA. So you need in between, you need a switchboard that supports a local battery.
Very good. Our third question from Berthold. Is it possible to dial from the Cisco via pulse dial to the PSTN?
So via pulse dial into the public switch telephone networks, that would also be possible. But what I actually described, if we try to find the slide, here it is. Yeah. So what I'm describing here basically is that you see there's two arrows going into this exchange here. Yeah, you can like this one, right? So there's one which is basically the where the outside line comes in. So if I take one of these phones and I press this earthing key, right, like the key that is shown here on the bottom right, that's basically a signal that I want to call outside of the PBX. Then this would basically connect to the line that is coming from the ATA that is shown here with there's like 502, so that's kind of the internal number that's associated with it, would connect there, and I would get a dial tone, and I could kind of dial through outside, right? But there's also this arrow coming from the top, which is connecting an FXO port of the Cisco to a subscriber port of this electronic exchange. And here now, I can, for example, take any phone from the collection, and I can, for example, dial 712, and the prefix 7 basically tells that I want to actually dial into this PBX, and I want to reach subscriber 12. And what the Cisco is configured to do then is it kind of takes it takes the line that is connected here to subscriber 20, and then it knows that prefix 7 needs to be stripped, and then it actually pulse dials the 1-2, for example, in the PBX, and then it rings the subscriber 12, which can then answer and then would be connected through. So I'm pulse dialing into the PBX, not in the other direction. Although that, if theoretically you had a pulse dial supporting ATA, you could also do that, but there's no good reason for that because the Cisco is able to speak SIP directly with Asterisk, so you wouldn't need to go kind of analog in that direction. But I think that might be why you are asking, because I was talking about like pulsing out into this exchange. There's a video on my website, or is there? I think so, that shows this in operation.
Oh yeah, very very good point. Thanks for adding. There are a number of videos of the various components
Unfortunately,
ringing,
my
dialing.
website is German only right now, so you
Okay.
would have to use some like translation tools in your browser.
All right. Our next question is from Joseph. Hi Jens, how many antique phones have you collected so far? I guess this is a two-part question. So we'll start there. How many antique phones have you collected so far?
Yes, so I would say I have about 100. I think there's some additional ones that are in parts or not kind of really usable, but roughly 100.
Okay. And then the second part, what is the first typical first reaction you receive from visitors to your museum? I'm assuming in real life visitors to your museum. What's the typical first reaction?
So yeah, people can make an appointment if they're interested. I'm a little bit in a rural area, so I get occasional people coming by, but like not too many. And yeah, I think there's some type of wow or something when they enter the room. That is sometimes being said. Some people just kind of look around. Yeah, some people have quite some knowledge already and just kind of want to see certain things. Other people just ask some questions. So it varies.
Yeah, and just to clarify, it is possible then to every each of those phones, the 100 phones, to dial from any one phone to the other. Is that
Yes,
what the
exactly. And into any other actual public phone network in the world, you can dial out from them as well.
now I've heard stories that sometimes the local loop can offer better sound quality. This is my own question. Have you, just curious if you've experienced that? It sounds sometimes when we have that handoff to a mobile phone, and I hear, all the frequencies get smooshed. It's not the most telephony term there, but what do you notice? I guess in some of those connections, do you think it's are you able to support more frequencies, and have you done that kind of analysis or?
So yeah, I mean the kind of original analog telephone standard, right? Like had a relatively narrow frequency band, which mostly was due to the fact that many calls were to be transferred over the same type of wires and were multiplexed, or like yeah, frequency shifted as well. So this didn't in the past apply, for example, to local calls or to calls within a PBX. At the same time, the properties of the microphone in use are, of course, also a strong influencer of the quality. So I would say if you have like SIP, if you support codec that has a good quality and you have a good microphone, like today you can reach a very good end-to-end sound quality even across the world compared to what was possible in the past. But at the same time, like obviously if you have an old phone and you actually call a cell phone, you combine like all the bad things together, right? So I would say in the ATA, also the connections actually are already going through a codec, right? Even if you call from one old phone to the other. But if you call from like within that manual exchange, for example, or within the electromechanical exchange from one subscriber to the other, then you have an end-to-end analog connection that goes through, and it definitely has a different sound and feel to it. It is I would say like maybe a bit warmer, right? At the same time, when you go to the really old telephones, like the local battery ones, you often have the situation that the microphones have aged or are just like period style microphones that just aren't as good, right? So you might be a bit muffled, or you might have like yeah some noise in it, right? Especially with those carbon microphones, as I mentioned, movements of the microphone would actually create some noise in the line. So there's different types of feelings to how the sound quality is. I also have most of the phones in one room, so it's a little kind of
Echo.
unrealistic if you talk to someone who is in the same room through the phone. You kind of should close your other ear. I do have one or two phones kind of in a different room so that you can actually talk through them. Yeah, some
That's funny. Have you found a favorite? I mean, they're beautiful designs. Some of the older phones. It's tough to look at the rectangle in your pocket the same way again after what was. But I guess some of those Western Electrics I fond of, but perhaps you have a one that you prefer to pick up when you are about to call a friend or family member around the world. Is there a preferred choice that you have?
The run here on the right, it's a Siemens telephone with a very special type of dial because it doesn't actually turn, but you can dial like from top to bottom. You don't need to do this circular motion. That was the idea of the design. Was supposed to make it easier to dial the numbers or quicker. Didn't really become a success, but I like to use that one every now and then.
Cool. I think. Thank you. It does look very interesting to have to insert your finger and then it's a downward motion
Yes,
to dial. Okay.
yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Fascinating. Well, not seeing any more questions at the moment. I think if there are any more, I'll hold the line open for a minute. But Oh, Bertha says thank you for the answer. Previous question on the related to the Cisco dial to the PSTN. So thanks for that. I guess we'll look forward to cross connecting more things. I didn't see any channel banks in there, but maybe that's we'll see if we can get a more modern things. I guess are you have connected SIP, so it's quite a lot of you're it's pretty much future proofed. I mean, it seems like everyone's in that direction nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah, are there any other new plans for you just continue to add phones as you come across them, or do you have your eye on a
I
few
mean, I think
expansions? Or
there's always reasons to be, or like at some point you need to be a bit selective in terms of what you get, otherwise it's too much. But I think definitely I have one of these, like as seen on the left. So this is not mine here actually on the left, but it's kind of in a period house with you see from the wallpaper. But there's a similar one here that I recently was able to get that is on one big wooden plate, like separate parts like that. It's kind of the oldest one I would say that I would have from like 1880, 18 maybe, yeah, 1885 maybe. So that one is in need for restoration, which I'm working on right now. So that's kind of a larger project that is kind of keeping me busy. So I would be very happy if I can actually make that one work end to end as a local battery one, and then kind of connect to the switchboard. So that's one project, and otherwise, yeah, I mean, there's here and there always opportunities that come. There's a lot still to do and to improve.
yeah,
There's
what model is that on the left that you're restoring then? And then I know that's someone else's at the moment, but something very similar. What who made that and what period is
So
that?
the one that I have is from a German company called Friedrich Reiner, which was one of the first German telephone manufacturers. And yeah, it's basically like a very early local battery telephone, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I guess careful reanimating that one. It looks like it's about to walk off the wall there, but appreciate the effort. Thanks for incorporating Asterisk and sharing that with us. Uh, I not to get into too much of the software development side, but maybe there's a GitHub post coming with some dial plan that we can see if you'd like. But thanks again for the presentation. I Thanks again for everyone participating and asking questions. We'll be back again tomorrow, Wednesday, as well as Thursday for a couple hours each day, looking at some more integrations, variety of interesting areas. So appreciate it. Hopefully we can, maybe get some of those on the plane to an AstriCon and see them ring in life, or just everyone take a trip to Munich this summer and take a look. So thanks a lot, Jens. Thanks everyone. Appreciate it. And we'll and Elvita as well. Thank you. We'll see you all tomorrow. Have a great day.
Thank you.